There may be no greater purpose than to impact the life of a young person toward success, and teachers get to do that. However, over time, just like in any industry, don't we get a little tired? Don't we get a little burnt out? Don't we get a little stressed? And maybe, just maybe, we aren't at our best. When we have a moment to make an impact, are we able to make the impact? You've got to be on purpose. There's Under Pressure, and we're going to talk about that next with Scott Barron on Purpose Under Pressure. Well, the heat is on. Let's get cooking. This is Purpose Under Pressure. It's a podcast about people, regular old business leaders like you and me, people that are kind of responsible for the outcomes. We wake up in the morning, we put our feet up on the floor, we get our shoes on, we go get it, and all of a sudden something goes wrong, doesn't it? Some kind of thing we weren't expecting around the next corner. And does it knock us down, or do we stand up? Do we rise against the pressure, or do we fall? That's what the show's all about. If you know what you want and you know how to get it, do we let things stop us? That's Purpose Under Pressure. And that's what the show is. Don't forget to like us or follow us or subscribe us or tell a friend. We really do appreciate it, because otherwise, how is anybody going to know that we're taking our time to do this? If we can't go out and yell in a hole. We need people to understand that that's what we're up against, and that's what we're trying to do, and that people aren't the only ones dealing with the pressure and the purpose. And so when you do subscribe or follow or tell a friend or tell your mom, it gets the job done, and we really do appreciate that. Purpose Under Pressure is brought to you by Sandler by the Ruby Group, serving sales professionals nationwide from Akron and Columbus and Jacksonville, Florida. They're also in upstate capital region of New York, providing sales training and business development and revenue generation strategies and skills for small and large businesses all across the country. Their sales training, yes, they are not gimmicks. They are not tactics. They are not tricks. Sales is not a dirty word. They're teaching you how to do it right. I know it because I've been through it. They are the right people for the right job when you're trying to do the right job, and that's trying to generate business for your company. So if you like that approach, doing things the right way on purpose, these folks are the ones you're going to want to talk to. You can check them out and find them online at therubygroup.sandler.com. If it makes you feel better, they've been promoters, partners for this podcast for all 8 seasons. They haven't stopped. They don't run. Things get weird or wild or iffy, they stick. And they're the kind of people you want training your team. So enough about them. Thank you to Sandler by the Ruby Group for being our sponsors today. My guest today is Scott Barron. He's the founder and chief reinvention officer with School Growth. And you know a little bit about me, folks, by now, because whenever I get a chance, I tell you about it. I'm a big fan of education, and I'm a big supporter of doing things right in schools. I spent time on school boards. I've spent time doing marketing for schools. And it's so important that we do things well at the education level for our kids so that the next generation gets it right. But too often we fail. And too often it's very, very difficult at the educator level to really succeed because of the tools they have and the limitations and restrictions that they have in front of them. And so School Growth exists to get those leaders and educational drivers of success to the levels that they need to get. And that's what Scott does. Scott Barron, welcome to the Purpose Under Pressure podcast.
Oh, well, Bryan, it's an honor and a pleasure. I love working together with you and all the adventures we've been on here in the last couple of years, and look forward to this conversation for sure.
Yeah, just talking with you, we do get to work together, and I do get to find out kind of what you're into, and it just keeps me that much close to the education world that I love so much, and a little bit of a finger on a pulse of what's really going on. And so let's talk about that, Scott. Let's talk about what's going on in the educational world and talk about school growth too, because things are really doing well for school growth, but that's because you're doing such a great job for teachers and educators.
Well, yeah. I mean, what creates the best environment for us is change, and because
Plenty of that.
we're having to reinvent. That's why I adopted that title of Chief Reinvention Officer. Was I love helping organizations and people find a new path forward, and finding that in purpose, like you said, finding purpose is prerequisite to sort of the theme of your show, and that's kind of true for all of us. I think that's why purpose is such something that so many people crave. If you think about even the book Purpose Driven Life is one of the most read books and published books, because there is a real need to figure that out. And I think in our business, in serving schools, we have a real passion for educators. We love educators and helping ease their journey. And that's a big part of what we've landed on as we innovated as an organization. You know, I served as a school administrator for about 14 years. And then before that, I run an education technology company. But over the last dozen years, we've been innovating on, how do you support the journey of schools, not just in trying to survive, but how do we thrive? Right. That's one of the key questions and the drivers behind our work is man, it's hard enough to be an educator, and knowing that educators are held to a higher standard. Right. So then how do we ease their pain? How do that's that line from the Field of Dreams, right? And how do we ease their pain? How do we make their journey just a little bit easier, and sometimes even helping them reinvent themselves, their schools, for the betterment of their communities, and being able to love their educators and their students, and to change their communities. And because education, we know it's such a vital part of education, of community transformation. And so that's what we're constantly looking for. Where are those opportunities? And if in an era of change like we are in now, and if from your experience, educators overall are not that comfortable with change, right? And so,
right.
Now those that lead schools are responsible for shepherding people through this period of fairly significant, even massive change, and doing that in a way where we stick together, that we keep our heads about us, and we sustain their joy for the work and for learning.
It's interesting too that it's not just educators that aren't necessarily quick to change. The whole system is built under these limitations and constraints, and government influence, and all kinds of different rules and regulations. It's almost sometimes, and I've seen it happen, where the kids have to teach the teachers, because they're out in front, and all the change that they need to get sometimes isn't easy to come by, right? They need someone to help kind of guide them through, because the system kind of rewards things, the status quo, a little bit.
100%. I agree. Yeah, schools typically there's a tendency to honor management versus leadership, right? Where we're trying to, just like you said, you use that term status quo, right? Just don't rock the boat, man. Just stay on course. And of course, there is a far greater adaptation among a younger spirit and mind and body, and they're able to learn some of the tech and some of the other pieces, and that's the interesting thing. I think that more school leaders are arriving at is understanding that, hey, what we don't want to just be a school or even just a place that's teaching a curriculum. We want to be a place that inspires. We want to be a place of excellence, right? And that's a big part of our methodology that we've kind of bought into. We've drunk the Kool-Aid, as they say, on that pathway of good to great, right? That research that was established as, hey, you actually can become an excellent organization, but it does require discipline. Excellence. One of the things that we have really found as a truth in leadership at all levels, but especially in education, is excellence is not the result usually of goals. I mean, you want to have goals. You have to know where you're going, but it's really habits. Habits are what transform the journey. And so that's what we have significantly committed ourselves to. Or what are those habits? What are the habits of excellence, which are usually there's habits of character, right? Of us and how we work together. And then there's habits of trust, And then there's habits of learning. And any organization, whether you're a school, whether you're running a business that's in manufacturing, distribution, it doesn't matter. If you're a leader, if you're on this podcast and you're trying to figure out how to lead, it's inevitably going to kind of come down to building a team of people who are willing to hone those habits. You have to have those habits of character, behavior, attitude, right? And then trust. We have to learn to trust each other. And then, man, if we can get those two things, if we can get people who really share a conviction together, and then they're willing to develop those habits, man, we can do some interesting things. You can learn that it really doesn't matter what business you're in. If you can build a team like that, game changer.
That's what I wanted to get to next, because a lot of people listening to the show aren't involved in education, but they're involved in business, and they're leading organizations, and they're working with people. And these same things are happening. People join an organization with best intentions.
Yeah.
5 years later, 10 years later, 3 days later, whatever it might be, things change. We change. Yes. And how do we manage that culture and that team movement going forward? So in the education world, I believe the best people in the world want to be teachers. Like, it starts from an early age. Like, I want to help people. I want to do
totally
good things. And I want to lead the future. And they have these great intentions.
Yeah.
If they have such great intentions, what happens that we need a group like yours to come and reinvigorate and reignite and stoke those fires? Because burnout happens, right? And people in all kinds of businesses know that. Like, what causes you to need to come in and fan the flame a little bit to create that kind of renewed driver towards excellence?
Well, so schools are very different. And like we've done strategic planning and guidance for a wide range of organizations. And I will tell you that doing planning and figuring out culture in a school is significantly more complex. And it's not just to try to excuse what happens in schools, but in a school setting, your customers are deeply emotionally connected, even bonded to your employees, right? So your family, your students, your parents,
that's right.
There's a very deep connection there. And that really does change the nature of leadership that happens in a school from other forms of business. Listen, a school's a business. There's no doubt about it.
They don't always see it that way, do they?
Where it's, it's economically viable and it has all the responsibilities of, well, it may not be a for-profit. It still, it still has to produce net revenue, right? It still has to be in business. And now I am speaking of schools that are not dependent on government structures to be able to fund them, and they're not accountable for those elements. But ultimately, I think we're moving more and more towards greater autonomy, but also accountability for schools. And so they're having to figure out, how do we lead through this? Well, schools are different, and I know a lot of people say, well, why can't schools be more like a business? Well, there are very distinct differences that it's important to at least respect and have a curiosity around. And so, as we move forward, there are things that apply in both, but in schoolwork, understanding how to lead trust. And it's a deep level of trust that you're trying to nurture and sustain in a school setting. And that's, this trust with your faculty, with your parents, with your students, with your board members, with your donors, with your community leaders, with your other influencers. And it's a pretty complex ecosystem. And so, what's one of the things that we have found is vitally important in school leadership. Again, these are things that apply across the board, but especially becomes important is communication. And communication means that I'm not just talking, right? Communication doesn't mean I'm just kind of throwing stuff out. I'm not hitting send. I'm actually creating trust. And this is where a lot of leaders, I think, confuse the terminology. Communication isn't just sending things out. Communication is building trust and engagement. And that's a really important distinction. Communication is not a goal. Good communication is not a goal. The goal is trust and engagement. Communication is just a discipline to do that. And that so
The
often
tool.
gets confused. And then we see leaders, again, across a wide spectrum who they kind of move up in levels of responsibility. And what they begin to realize is that their habits of communication are insufficient for the responsibilities that they now have. But so often they kind of don't know what to do with that. And you've got all these, this plethora of communication tools. You have a toolbox, I mean, that's teeming with options, right? But knowing how to use those tools effectively to build trust and engagement, that's usually where there's a drop off. And over communication doesn't solve that problem. You start firing off a bunch of emails to your target market, and you know what's going to happen, right? It's just going to be delete, 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 delete. Right?
Yeah.
You have to communication. You have to listen, right? You have to listen, and this is where we see a lot of entrepreneurs and others in different forms of leadership is they don't have the humility and the curiosity to listen, right? And to figure out how to
Well, they're
adapt.
leaders. They're in charge. They're the ones that got to go. Come on, follow
Right.
me. Let's roll. Right? They
Yeah.
missed that idea.
Yeah. If you kind of, there's a pendulum between curiosity and confidence. And if you swing too far towards confidence, you're going to get confused and you're going to miss opportunities because you're not looking, you're not paying attention. And I think one of the questions that we have found is useful in leadership, again, particularly when all the variables are changing as fast as they are today, is, hey, if we start with the assumption that we don't know what we don't know about our customers, right? If we start with that assumption, then it enables us to maybe hear a little bit more clearly, to pay attention, to see what's happening, because innovation, problem solving isn't just listening to see what, having them tell us what they want. Generally, they don't know what they want. It's how do you create value? How do you create things they never even thought of before? How do you begin to solve, for their problem? But reading between the lines is a vital part of strategy development, and that's one of the things that we teach a wide range of organizations, especially schools. Is you do have to develop a very deep level empathetic understanding of your target market, and then begin to innovate and solve the problems and test, right? And that's one of the things that schools struggle with, is the idea of, it's the F word. It's failure, right?
Yeah, nobody wants
is
to do that.
Failure is not cool.
That's
To
what they
fail in schools, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we celebrate honor roll and A's, and wait a minute, failure? There's that line you've seen in social media. Ain't nobody got time for that, right? But unfortunately, that's where you learn the most, and we want to ostracize failure in ways that really does limit sometimes our ability to listen and learn.
Yeah. Because of that, not understanding where things are, not knowing what they know.
Yeah.
And a lot of business folk will like this answer too, I think. What should a leader look for to realize that they need to reach out to someone like you or in other industries consultant?
Right.
How should they realize that they're on maybe the wrong track? The ship's not sailing towards the port they're trying to reach. How do they how do they know when to call you,
Yeah. Well, I mean, seeking advice and solutions. There are some people that, Bryan, my experience has been some people are naturally wired to have a humility and want help, and others just, they're just not. I mean, so we understand that our target market for school growth, because we have our for-profit and school growth, and then we have our not-for-profit and educators fellowship, right? For school growth, our target market is school leaders, but not just all of them. We're really trying to target school leaders who, first, they have an attitude that's coachable. I mean, they're willing to ask questions, and they want somebody who's not in the mix. And I will tell you that, having worked with coaches myself and sought advice, the purpose of having a coach or some a consultant is to accelerate learning curves, right? That's one, or it's to find economies of wisdom or scale. So one of those three, either I'm trying to figure out a way to get through and that's often where I will use a coach. I'm trying to get through a learning curve, and can I learn it on my own? Eventually, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But man, if I could compress that timeline, and even if I have to invest more up front, and I can get through that better and faster, well then game on, right?
Let's go with that way.
So
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that I've learned in my own personal life is there are times when you need help, you need a coach, you need someone to guide you, and that's the reason that coaching is such a large industry, and consulting as well. We get to be, for school leaders, they say it's always lonely at the top, right? Well, for school leaders, it is, because it's even more lonely, I guess you could say, because they really are very limited in the people that they can confide in and learn with and from, because you've got your board, but you can't be totally vulnerable there, and you can't with your faculty or your
Yeah.
families in the school, and so you can kind of be on an island sometimes. And that's, again, in our passion, our love for educators, is we want to be there. It's kind of like that best friend that's there, that you can talk to, that we actually can be free from any type of obligations to share things that are shared in private. And so really, in some ways, Bryan, it's a ministry. It's a ministry to them, to love them and to support them, and because they get to make a difference in a lot of lives, but it's complicated. And so trying to help them figure out, again, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things we discovered is that communication in a school is much more involved. And so we actually developed a communication methodology for schools. We're actually publishing a book on that later this year, and it's called The Laws of the Grapevine. And there are certain things I could, it's funny, very often we'll hear back from different board members or school heads or whatever, and they'll say, man, you have no idea how much using those tools completely saved us, because we were in a mess. And because schools, we have a bumper sticker that says school happens, right? Schools are complicated, dealing with all kinds of stuff. And so if you know how to communicate and sustain trust, then people are willing to give you the benefit of the doubt, and because they know that you're reliable. They have a confidence in you, right? And you know how to build executive presence, and you know how to deliver on your promises, right? And that's one of the things, that's what we coach on in our system, is we're coaching specifically school leaders through navigating the complexities of that network of relationships, but then knowing how to build executive presence, to knowing how to build people, and knowing how to make progress. Those are the three ingredients that go as a part of our coaching system. And I, the good thing is that the average tenure of a school head is fairly short. It's more like 3 to 4 years in some areas, and most of our heads have been around in their positions. Their tenures are 8, 9, 10, 12 years, and it's because they focus on the things that matter, and they are able to just generate a trust and a confidence that others are not.
It's interesting then, I don't know the answer to this question. So there's a perfect fit then for school growth and for you. And I'm a big believer
Yeah.
in, some of the best yeses are the no's you give. Like, you can grow by
For
saying no
sure.
more often. So you've identified that there's people that can be helped by school growth,
Yep.
and there's people that can't, and you've
That's right.
figured out a way to say no. Is that right?
Yeah.
I think that's a
I would
big lesson
estimate
for
that
businesses.
2/3 can't. 2/3 are
Two
not
thirds.
our target market. Our
Yeah.
target market is about 1/3 of the market overall. Attitude,
Mm,
aptitude, altitude. Those are the three areas that we're looking for to evaluate in our target market. And as an entrepreneur, I will tell you that it's one of the things I have found is often underdeveloped in entrepreneurial thinking and leadership, is they actually don't know who they serve. Often they've created a solution in search of a problem, right? They've come up with some tech or some other things. We coach a lot of ed tech companies and founders, and so often, you got to drill in and say, well, tell me what you know about your target market. What are their pains? What are the things they're going through? What are you solving for? And it inevitably it comes back to they start talking about their product or their solution or their
Yeah.
service. Like, well, no, I didn't ask you about that. I asked you about what do you know about your target market? And so often they
Okay.
don't know what they
They don't
don't
get it.
know
That's
about
right.
their target market. And they don't know how they're going to pay for it. They don't know what's going to motivate them. There's just so many things that are unqualified. And that's a very careless way to lead a company. You
Mm.
want to be intentional, and that's nothing new. If you watch Shark Tank, you see people get up on the carpet there and they get called on the carpet, so to speak, and because they don't know their customer, they
They
don't know
don't
their
know.
customer acquisition costs, they don't know their numbers, right? And so there's a leadership responsibility. Listen, I love entrepreneurship, but the failure rate of entrepreneurs is fairly high. And often it's because they're not asking enough questions. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you're being able to be intentional about your question, and even sometimes narrowing that down to just one or two. What are the driving questions that your organization is working on now and that you're designed around, right? Our question is, how do we make life a little bit easier? How do we ease the journey for those that accept the responsibility for leading schools, right?
And so that leads me to my next question, Scott, because you're a very purpose driven person. You love educators, and you and your wife and the whole team do what you
Yes.
do to make educational leaders better. And yet,
Right.
their product, like we were talking about before, is the kids. 18 years later, what do the kids remember, right? Is one way to put it, or what kind of people have we grown,
Sure.
or that's their output. That's the product, the kids that go through the system. You can't always gauge that. My question is, how do you gauge success when you're purpose driven? I know you can look at the books and
Right.
to make sure the bills are paid,
Yeah.
but how do you know you're really doing your job well if you don't see the end
Yeah.
result
No,
until
that's a very
18
good
years?
question.
Everyone in the organization needs to know how to sell. Sales is the strength of any company. Whether or not you're in marketing, operations, or even finance, everyone has a strong shared accountability towards driving top-line revenue. Whether or not you're client-facing or talking over the phone, you're able to build a stronger level of rapport with the clients. Everyone in the organization shares that responsibility to know how to sell.
But how do you know you're really doing your job well if you don't see the end
Yeah,
result
no,
until
that's a very
18
good
years?
question. Well, so one thing I would challenge and often do is the understanding or the concept that students are the product of a school. That's typical thinking.
Okay.
Although we have found that in actuality, as an educator, as an education leader, I don't actually control for student outcomes, right?
You
There's so
can't.
many variables that go into student growth, their DNA, their home life, their peer group, their attitude, their social economic backgrounds, trauma in their life. I mean, there's about 25
Mm.
different variables that go into student growth. As a school, I really only control three, right? Curriculum, culture, and people, right? The quality of
Yeah,
my
yeah.
team, which is
Your
actually
people, your team.
that's the number one. By far and away, the data shows that what has the highest impact on student growth is the quality and qualities of your educators, counting everybody in the building, right? So what is the product of a school is a very critical question that we're challenging as a part of our process, is because what we have concluded is that actually the product of a school is your educators and the experience they create every day, right? But I
Interesting.
can control those variables. I can,
You can.
but I can't control for student outcomes. Likewise, I can make recommendations in our relationship with school leaders. I don't make decisions, right? So
Mhm.
part of what we
Good point.
measure is the effectiveness of our tools and of our process. Are we easing their journey? Are we helping them really make better decisions? Are we helping them achieve the metrics that they're being held accountable to? And
Hmm.
and now I will tell you that in
You can measure
schools,
that.
yeah. But in schools, so often it's very vague, and in any type of an emotionally charged ecosystem, vagueness is not your friend. Because then we see school boards do this to superintendents or educators all the time, where they get held accountable for things that came out of nowhere. It's like, you know, it's very difficult to win when you don't know how you're going to keep score,
Hmm.
right?
That's right.
And if we're not
How do you
all
know?
playing the same game, and unfortunately, again, this is where those that are involved in leading educational systems are often put in very dysfunctional situations with an enormous amount of conflict, because we don't even have agreement on what does it mean to be successful.
Hmm.
Right?
No,
And because if
that's
I'm
never part
basing
of the
this on
5-year
my
plan, is
kids,
it?
right?
Yeah.
If I'm basing this on my kids' experience or on what I've felt lately, or just whether I'm happy or whether I'm getting complaints or whatever, right? It's well, okay. Well, then if that's how you're going to measure things, then you really are looking for someone who will just kind of sustain status quo. Because if you're going to
Yeah.
lead, if you're going to challenge things, that's going to get uncomfortable. And in the
Mhm.
school world, what's really different is schools are actually very ripe places for conflict to grow. I
Mm.
mean, it's if you want to, if you were in the sort of the growing business and you wanted to grow conflict, schools would be the best source, the fertile soil for that, right? Because you're taking all these families with all their features and faults, and you're putting them in this sort of this ecosystem together, and the idea that somehow that's going to come together with this great level of peace and joy and kumbaya,
Mm.
that that's just not even
Mhm.
logical, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't minimize conflict, it multiplies conflict, because not
Yeah.
only are we putting them together, we're asking them to grow, right? Well, growth is hard, growth is challenges, growth is uncomfortable, growth forces you outside of your comfort zone, right? And so, yeah, schools are the perfect scenario to see a lot of dysfunctional behavior. But the challenge for schools at all levels and all kinds, it's not the kids, it's the adults. And it's the
Mhm.
adults figuring out how to behave and trust each other and solve problems together. And what holds us back throughout most education ecosystems, systems, etc., is having adults learn how to resolve conflict, trust each other, communicate with each other, and grow.
And that includes the parents too. That's not
All
just the teachers
all of
and the
us,
employees. That's
all of us.
everybody that's an
That's right.
adult to do the right
Yeah.
thing for kids. I've got a
Mm-hmm.
quick question, and it's about the same thing, and businesses will appreciate this too. You talk a lot about culture, and you
Yeah.
just talked about culture and getting the right things and harmony from your team.
Yep.
What's the most important thing a leader in education or even in a business setting can do to create the right culture? Does it start at hiring?
Mm,
Is it part of a process? Have I asked a
right.
bigger question than you could answer quickly? What's that's got to be a tough thing, but I know how important it is.
Well, I mean, there's some great books on this that speak to some methods for creating culture and for leading culture.
But what have you
Uh,
found?
I have found that Peter Drucker once said that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and I have found that
Mhm.
culture. That's probably not the best way to put it. I think culture is actually the ultimate strategy,
Yeah,
because
I think so too.
culture is the result of your beliefs and your habits,
I agree.
right?
Yep.
And but so often there is a lack of clarity around, well, what are our beliefs? What are the habits? And are we willing to do three things? Are we willing to teach what that looks like? Right? Are we willing to create a common understanding together among our team, among our organization, that, hey, these are the things that if you're going to be on our team, these are non-negotiables, right? Because the rule about culture is what you tolerate, right? And so what are you willing to draw the line on? We call it the critical line in failure. At what point do you draw the line and say, hey, now that's a code red moment, right?
That's not going to work. Yep.
There's consequences now, right? And so often we see organizations where they've got some really pretty core values up on the wall, and they read well, and maybe they've even invested some time in them. But for the most part, they're irrelevant. They're not even real, because they're willing to tolerate people who consistently violate what it says, and so the first thing is you have to be able to teach it. But the second thing is you have to be able to coach your values, right? You have to be able to provide feedback loops. How you do it? Hey, Bryan, listen, love you, man, but I need you to figure this out, because there's some things here that we're struggling with, and let's work on some things here, right? Let's grow, right? And then the third thing is, are we willing to enforce? Are we willing to hold accountability to what we say, right? And you have to have all three. If you're going to create culture, it has to be consistent teaching, coaching, and then expecting or enforcing. And there has to be a firm line there. Otherwise, culture leaks, right? It usually doesn't implode. It goes through just subtle leaks and leaks and leaks, and then it's gone, right? It's not even real. And so you do have to hire. I have found that it's a lot easier to hire people with those values and habits than it is to train your way into that. There's some things you can. We say sort of the acronym for professional development. You could PD your way through some things, but there's boundaries to that, right? Mm-hmm. So you hiring people who have a shared conviction around the mission. They've developed certain habits, as we've gone through and looked at culture. Number one is we have found it is the ultimate strategy. It is because the advantage to culture is you can't copy culture. I can hire your people. I can copy your products, your recipes, your marketing, right? But it's really hard to copy culture, because it's the result of disciplines, of habits, and you don't copy those things, right? So it's why a Ritz-Carlton or a Chick-fil-A or some of these other organizations sustain such a significant competitive advantage, is because they don't just sell a hotel room or a chicken sandwich or whatever else. They're actually selling culture. It just happens to be that that's what's on their menu or on their services or products, right? And so if you can get to the point of a very consistent, disciplined culture, and listen, where there's a love. And see, that's where sometimes you have separation. Is there has to be a genuine passion for what we're doing here, and not just what we're doing, but how we're doing it. And that's what culture is. Culture is us agreeing to certain behavioral norms and habits of trust together, that how we do it is as important as what we do. And so often we see companies that they sometimes are very successful for a while because they focus on results, and there's sometimes they have their ABC players and all these other things going on. But having accountability without love is not sustainable. Yeah. And that's why we use that line, love them and lead them, in our method, in our messaging, in our methodology.
Yeah, love them and lead them, and knowing how important it is that success on the other side can change lives and change worlds. I mean, we don't just show up in the morning and go to work and come home and go to bed. I mean, we're trying to do something on purpose, and by loving and leading, you're doing it. And speaking of that, love and lead them, and as we wrap up here, the I know not everybody can work with you. I know only a small percentage of schools can work with you, and certainly the businesses that are listening to the
Mhm.
show and the business leaders can't work with you. But there are ways to engage with you. I think
Yeah,
if I could hire you for any business, the business would generally gain some wisdom. But you have your weekly email updates that you do. You've got your
sure.
podcast. You've got your book, Love 'Em and Lead 'Em, which is a
Mhm.
bestseller and
Right.
highly recommended for leaders of all different types of vocations. But go
Yes.
through some of the ways that people who can't hire you, or even some of those that might want to hire you now, could reach out to you or at least take advantage of some of the
Sure.
pieces that you're
Well, we
putting
love
out.
doing some motivational programs. So there's some things that we do there that's, again, around creating culture and creating these environments for people to thrive. There's all of that flows back into what we're doing for schools. So while we do some programming and other resources, we're launching the book, the laws of the grapevine, and so that will be geared towards a wide range of people because there's anybody whose role or success is dependent on relationships, which is typically a lot of people, right? Where they need to develop a trust and a relationship in their sphere of influence, then that's going to be a valuable resource for them. And so we're hoping that will be able to impact those that are involved in sales or marketing or CEOs or
Good.
pastors, people who work in any hospitals, as working sometimes in very complex organizations, learning the principles of communication, learning how to build trust through how you communicate will be vital. So we'll have some of that coming out, but on some of the folks that may be in your network are, they're trying to make a difference maybe in the schools in their community, and so
Hmm.
being able to connect with what we're doing with Educators Fellowship, which is geared towards educators in all realms, public, private, charter, uh, preschool all the way up through higher ed, where there are educators, we want to be a voice into their circle and their influence and try to encourage them in their calling and in their faith. And so that the Educators Fellowship is a great way. Some companies are looking for a way to maybe make a difference in education, and so we that's a great way to do it is through the not-for-profit Educators Fellowship, which is edfellowship.org. And of course, we have a variety of different things that we're doing there. Again, just encouraging educators, but we have partners that are in that sphere where they want to be a part of that process. They want to speak into the lives of educators. Sometimes just to say thank you. Sometimes to say, hey, here's some resources and we'd love to help you. You guys have access to these things, right? So that's what we do through Educators Fellowship. And then again, if there are opportunities to, maybe there's people that are on a school board or they want to be able to create some resources in their community that speak to how do we elevate our game? How do we create a culture here
Hmm.
that enables people to thrive, and especially our educators? Well, then, school growth is a great way to do that. And we invite, those that have a curiosity there, they want to figure out how to grow. That's a place that we can connect and would love to share with them our weekly encouragement messages that go out every Monday
Hmm.
morning and our podcast and other pieces. So that's there are schools, and then there are learning organizations, and that spans a wide range. And of course, as we move into a lot of the changes happening in these next few years, driven by a lot of tech and social factors and other things, we're all going to be adapting. And so learning organizations will have a very distinct advantage. And so we are exploring ways to continue to foster conversations with those types of leaders and to be a part of their journey.
I'm familiar with your podcast, Educators Among Us, and one of the things
Mhm.
that you talk about every so often in those shows, depending on the format of the show, but you talk with those who are making an impact in the world about an educator who has impacted them. And as we
Yeah.
wrap up this program, I want to thank you for doing that because I think it reminds people
Mhm.
that these educators, these coaches, anyone that speaks into your life at a younger age or anywhere, I guess, probably along the spectrum, but typically at a younger age, it's
Yeah.
so important. Those moments, they're either
100%.
taken advantage of and soaked in and used, or they're wasted.
Yes.
And if we're not on the top of our game in anything, if we have a moment to make an impact that helps our purpose, moves it
Yes.
forward, moves someone forward, and we
Yep.
miss it, oh, what a loss, what a waste.
Mhm.
And so the effect that you're having and trying to have and trying to make in the education world, businesses that are trying to impact others through the products and services that they produce and sell, you got to be at your best. You got to realize when you're not, and you got to be at your best when you are. And for educators and for all of us that are impacted by educators, it's so important. And
Oh,
so
for
I thank
sure.
you for what you do. I thank you
Yeah.
for what you do
Well,
with
thank you.
Educators Among Us and school growth and Educators Fellowship. It's just amazing. It's necessary, and I'm glad that you were part of our show. And I appreciate everything that you do, Scott.
Well, my pleasure for sure. I love your focus on purpose, because yeah, everybody goes through phases where that pressure really does grow, and we have
Everybody.
found that those that understand their purpose and that stay committed to it, developing the necessary habits, they succeed. And so that's why, messages like what you're sharing are so important.
Well, thank you. That's Scott Barron. He is the founder and chief reinvention officer with School Growth, and I hope that if there's something that he said or talked about here, that you'll check out his podcast, Educators Among Us. You'll check out his book, Love Him and Lead Him. He's got another book coming up. I think, Scott, you said Through the Grapevine. Is that right?
Laws of the Grapevine. That's right.
Laws of the Grapevine. So that's on its way. And I hope you'll engage in some way, because he has a lot to help you with. And he is definitely someone on purpose. And he's my guest on Purpose Under Pressure, brought to you by Sandler by the Ruby Group. Sellers are under pressure to perform, and Sandler helps you to succeed on purpose. That's the key designation. You're going to find all past episodes of Purpose Under Pressure at bryanmediastrategies.com/podcast and wherever you stream your favorite shows. We do this every week, and we will see you next time on Purpose.